Director Mulvaney, thank you for appearing today, and I appreciate your comments as I'm sitting and listening. I'd like to jump back to enforcement actions, and you started out by talking about that you are engaging in enforcement actions, and I believe you talked about undergoing right now 100 investigations. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And
were those investigations started under your watch or prior to you coming into the...
Some of them, the ordinary course of business is we sort of add some on a regular basis. They drop off. There's 100 ongoing at any one particular time.
And under your watch of those 100, some you started?
Yeah, actually, you'd be surprised to know I'm actually not involved in the decision-making to start or stop an investigation.
But they were either started under, some of them were started
I would imagine, yes, ma'am.
You would imagine, but you don't know for sure.
Again, and I know that sounds strange. I'm not involved in the process. That's a career decision as to who they investigate.
And 25 litigation efforts you talked about that are ongoing. Do you know if any of those were started while you were, or while you're under the...
Oh, no, I know the answer to that question. We have not started any new lawsuits since I've been here.
So there's been no enforcement action, say, for instance, under your watch?
No new ones.
No
we
new
are actively litigating 24 or 25.
That's helpful. Does that have anything to do with the fact that I heard your comment earlier? You're talking about that the CFPB engages in regulation by enforcement, and so you've stopped enforcement because you have concerns about that.
No, again, regulation by enforcement is different than enforcement. Regulation by enforcement is essentially, look, we don't have a rule, we don't have a reg, we're not going to tell you what the rules are, but we're going to sue you and then tell you after that what you did that we thought was against the
Right,
rule.
for that reason you haven't started any enforcement actions.
No, ma'am, there's a lot of contributing factors as to why we haven't filed any lawsuits. That might be one of them.
So can I ask, has the Consumer Bureau taken any public enforcement action related to the Equifax breach?
I'm not, our policy, I'm trying to see if I can get this right. The policy of the Bureau is not to comment on the existence or non-existence of any ongoing investigations. As to Equifax, I would point out to you that they disclosed publicly in their last 10Q that they were under investigation by the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
Has the Bureau taken any public action related to allegations that Clayton Homes practiced racial discrimination in lending to manufactured home buyers?
I'm not aware, and again, I don't want to comment on the existence or non-existence. I'd be happy to get back to you as to whether or not, I'm not familiar with Clayton Homes to the matters you've just raised.
Okay, so let me jump back to another issue that has come to my attention. In February, the Consumer Bureau put out a request for information asking for comments from interested parties on the usefulness of the Bureau's consumer complaint data reporting and analysis.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you using this RFI to either dampen the effectiveness of the database or completely remove it from public view?
Well, the collection of data is mandated statutorily. So we will continue to do that.
Now, let's talk about this, because we're not just saying general data. These are consumer complaints.
Complaints, yes, ma'am.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So you did an RFI.
Right.
And what's the intent of the RFI? Is it your intent to take these consumer database offline, out of public view?
It's not the intent. It is one option available to me.
Why are you even looking at that?
Because it's not statutorily mandated.
What's not statutorily mandated?
The public-facing portion of the consumer database, the complaint database.
So let me ask you this then. How are we to gather information and see patterns of practices, and how are you going to continue to work with other law enforcement agencies like the Attorney Generals across the state when you're looking at consumer protection?
Closing off the public-facing portion of the consumer complaint database would not impact the collection of that data in any way.
So you haven't made a determination as you sit right now whether you're going to take it off public view?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Let me jump.
But again, if I were to make that decision, that's completely within my discretion under the statute.
Mm-hmm. So the Bureau has a legal charge to protect people from unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices. We've talked about that.
Yes, ma'am.
And you have the responsibility to make sure financial firms treat similar customers the same. The way that you enforce that is by looking at the data, and we've talked about that. However, it's my understanding that you have stopped banks from sharing information with examiners. Is that true?
No, ma'am. I think you may be referring to the data freeze that we made. We have changed some of the methods by which we collect data for the reasons I mentioned before regarding our security. Again, if anyone wants to stick around, we can talk. It takes 2 minutes to talk privately afterwards as to why we've done that.
So as we sit here today, what you're telling me is that you have not stopped banks from sharing information with the examiners.
That's correct.
Okay.
What we've tried to do is limit the amount of data that we actually take possession of. Give you an example. Instead of having them send it to us electronically, we're going to look at it.
Okay. I notice my time is up. Thank you very much,
Thank
and
you.
I'll submit the rest of my questions for the record. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.